Imagine a massive storm hits and power is out for weeks, and you don't have a plan and you don't have anywhere to go. How are you going to deal with that? Well, imagine also that you can be prepared for whatever may hit, and our guest today has some really cool answers that will help. Hey, Provident Preppers, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Kylene, and today we are thrilled because we love talking about community. And today we're going to talk with Keith Hindman, who is an elder at his church and who has been working really hard for the past 17 years to be able to prepare his community. And he's even writing or has written a huge 293-page book as a resource for those that he is teaching. So Keith, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us your story?
Well, John and Kayleen, I really appreciate you having me on. This is very exciting. In a nutshell, the story, it all started back in this thing that you might remember called Y2K. I think everybody on the planet was a prepper at that time. And my pastor asked me and a large group from our church to try and get things ready. So we had set up 3 homes from 3 couples in our church that had volunteered to be what we call refuge homes. And so that got it started. And so when it was all done and didn't happen, which, by the way, I was a little disappointed. We'd done a lot of preparations for that and just for nothing.
Yeah.
But so that's what got me started. And so I had collected all the notes, just written down everything that we had done and prepared, kept all the lists, the shopping lists and everything, and wrote that into just some notes just for myself. But what really got things turned around was in 2009, May 8th, we had what we were calling a duratio, was basically just an inland hurricane. And that's when things really turned because, we were running quite a few people. We were probably around 300 plus, and my pastor was saying, we've got to do something if we experience this anytime in the future. How are we going to help to take care of the students that we're responsible for? Because most of who we minister to are international students, and they have no way of getting home. They're in classes, they're in school, they can't just up and leave. So we started at that point getting a little more serious on doing that. So taking the notes from the Y2K that I had collected very quickly became this manual that I had put together. And I had to stop somewhere because there's so much information of things people can do. It's just overwhelming. So I stopped at 298 pages and just started this one. I'm already thinking about a volume 2.
Yeah, there really is tremendous amount of information, and sometimes that's difficult. And it sounds like you've done a really good job of distilling that down into 300 pages.
Yeah, and I've tried to make it for a beginner. I've tried to make it, I've always tried to use the KISS principle, K-I-S, keep it simple. So that people who have no idea can look through this and go, oh, okay, that's how you do that. How do you open a can without a can opener? Oh, that's how you do that. Fishing. So I have a lot of things in there. One of the things that I really enjoyed putting together was when we had the refuge homes. Since we were going to be living in community, I really had a burden to try to come up with some kind of guidelines on what's it like to live in a community, setting up an authority structure, setting up a spiritual structure, pastors, and things that we could do in the group, and then chores. How are chores going to be laid out? Who's going to be responsible for what? And then how does that look? Everything from collecting firewood, and the team that gets firewood needs more water because they're working harder out in the heat, and so the water team has to do certain things. But even through the security, if you're in a community and people see that, then you're going to have a lot of others kind of wandering in, wanting to harm or to take what you've got. So put together a large security team portfolio, which I've also incorporated as head of security at my church to train the security team on how to deal with stressful situations. So there's a section in the manual about how to live in a community. There's a lot of advantages, a lot of disadvantages. Some of the advantages, you've got a lot of different skills that you can draw on. There's always people around that you can talk to, relationships, built-in babysitters. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. But then there's disadvantages. You don't really have any alone time, space for where you're going to stay. So trying to incorporate all that and come up with solutions that would make it as the best of the situation as we can.
And community is so important, but I think you've hit on an important point. Is there, there's some things that need to be worked out, some structure that has to come with that. And of course, you're dealing with, different personalities and different situations. And so these complicate it, but it sounds like you've done a really good job of kind of laying out what needs to happen and the rules so that everybody can live comfortably in that community.
Yeah, some tough
Right.
questions that happen there. Like, what do you do with someone who doesn't want to obey the rules, right? And
Right.
what if that person happens to be my husband? Not that he would, right? But like, you've got all kinds of entanglements, should we say?
Yeah.
And hard questions, right? Because
Right.
if they're expelled from the community, I mean, banishment could result in death.
Exactly. And that's very, very serious. And that's a part of that too, is looking at that as far as discipline, because I push in there a lot that laziness will not be tolerated. When you're in a community, it takes everybody. And for someone to be lazy and sit back, the Bible talks a lot about laziness, and just having guidelines in place so that if there is someone that's not wanting to cooperate, not wanting to do their part and add to the community, then dealing with that, whatever type of discipline, whatever thing, however that might look. And a lot of that stuff, you can make rules and regulations and write stuff down all you want, but then you're dealing with different personalities. Who's going to be able to handle that and who's not? And like you said, Kayleen, it may end up in banishment. It may be, we've given you chance after chance. We've tried to help you, and you refuse. So it's time for you to leave. And sometimes that might be enough to go, oh, okay, all right, I'll start pitching in.
One of the things that I'm really excited about is that your manual is written, right? Because there's no way for us to remember everything, even with us who does this regularly. How could our audience access your manual? Is that even a possibility for them?
Well, I've thought about that a lot, and trying to just put it online out there for everyone. There's a lot of information in there, a lot of articles. Getting permission from everybody has been, so far it's been really great, and everyone has been very cooperative, like you guys. I appreciate for the articles and stuff that I put from your website in there to be able to use some of those things. There's a lot of personal stuff, not just for me, but our community and how we look at things and do things, that I really was kind of concerned about just putting it out there for anybody and everybody. So kind of what I've done is, what has spawned off of this has been kind of a business for people who know that this is something they need to do, they want to do it, and just don't have the time. I've had a lot of conversations with people saying, you need to get something ready, even if it's just for 60 days, a month, 3 months. Yeah, you're right, I'll get to that. And then they never do. So what I've decided to do is offer a service to get things like this set up for people. And then they will get a copy of the manual for free. Then they can look through it, they can grow and expand however they choose for themselves, for their families. And so trying to just do it along those lines is the way I'm kind of going with it right now.
What do you think is the most important thing, as you've been doing all of this, a family when they're starting out prepping, what do you think is the most important thing for them to address?
Well, that's a complicated question. It's a very good question. Thanks for asking that. You hear commercials all the time, 20-year, 25-year shelf life food. I hear very little to nothing on water. We can go 45 days without food. You can't go 3 days without water. So addressing a lot of the concerns on there, how to filter, how to treat, how to store, that's probably the biggest concern for me, is making sure that people have water, have filtration, and know how to use it. Another thing that I stress when I'm talking to people or dealing with customers is drills. You got to have drills and tabletops. So not just being able to have the stuff and think, okay, I'm ready to go. But then if something happens and you go and you open up some of this equipment and some of your filtration systems, you're like, I don't know how to use this. What good is it to you? So I really stress to people a lot of times, let's do a drill. I've gotten guys from our church, and we would just pick a weekend. And so I go down to my breaker box and turn off the main coming in. So, okay, we've got 2 days with no electricity. Here's what I've got. Let's see what we missed. Let's see what we've got that we don't need. Let's see what we need more of. And so as we've started to learn how to use the filtration systems, how to learn to use the communication systems, that's vital in my mind. You have to know how to use the equipment that you've stored.
And I appreciate you bringing that up, because practice is such an important part of this. And unless you really have done it, like you said, turn off the power or turn off the water or whatever, you really don't know fully what you're doing. So these practice things, these drills, if whatever you want to call them, I think are just so critical. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
So we did that. Well, we've done that a lot, but one of the times when we did that, our children were young, and it was Utah in January, and it was cold, and we turned off our power, which meant we had no heat. And by doing that, we learned so much, because way back then when I was doing my prepping, I thought candles were a super good way out to light, right? But I learned that with the candles, the little ones are always trying to stick stuff in them.
Mm-hmm.
And Mama was too. She's fascinated by flame.
And they're not very bright, right? And there's
Right.
all kinds of hazard with them. So now I am a super huge fan of solar lighting, because it's significantly safer. But that wood burning stove that you see behind us, we put that in because we built this house, but when we moved, that was the first thing, even before the walls were framed, that
Wow.
wood burning stove went in, because I had been cold and I never wanted to be that cold again.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of different things, like I had thought, well, if this happens, I can work on this, and this project. But when it's dark and it's cold, you are not productive. You are just in this mode of like self-preservation, and you can't do all these things that you think you could do. And so practicing, you learn so much, and then you can adapt your plan in a much more realistic way.
Yeah, and especially you mentioned children. You can make this fun. If you really have small ones, because you want to help them to be able to deal with hard situations that might produce fear. But if you do a drill, you do a tabletop, and you make it a game, it's like, hey guys, we're going to do camping this week, and here's how we're going to do it. You can do all kinds of fun things for the children to get them ready, so that when there is an emergency, they have a muscle memory that kicks in to say, oh, we don't have any electricity, we don't have any heat, then here's what we need to do. And it takes the fear out of it for them.
It does. And some of the things like the light sticks or the glow sticks that we would have, that's really exciting for them. And children, like, they mirror your emotions. If they can see or sense that you're uptight about this, they're going to be afraid. But if you got this, you know what, we practice, we're okay, we're fine, we got this, it changes everything. So yeah, it does. So is there anything else that you would recommend for your families before we move on?
Just practice, make sure that you've got what you need. I guess one more thing I would add is you kind of have to decide what is going to be your standard of living. That kind of sets a guideline for what you prep and how much you prep. When we are in a disaster situation, life's not going to be the way that it is now. So you have to be able to determine, okay, the standard that I want is XYZ. What do I need to prepare for that? How am I going to get the proper lighting? Whatever a person's individual needs or wants are. If it's someone who doesn't mind roughing it and going wilderness, then they might not need to do that much. But if it's like an older couple or a family with smaller kids and they really need to keep more of a standard to maintain their family unit the best way that they can, then they have to decide what's their standard going to be, and that'll give them a guide on how much they need to prepare.
That's a really
that's
good
a
point.
great point.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Because I know, like, for my mother-in-law, she has oxygen. She has to have oxygen at night, right? And that's part of her basic subsistence thing. So for her, we had to do a nice battery backup. And yet, if it was just like us when our kids were younger, They're tough. They're resilient. We can put on more layers, right? But with her,
Yeah.
everything changes.
Yeah, I had the same situation with the duratio. My father was on oxygen machine. He was at home, but he had to have that to live. And when we recognized the power's not going to come back on soon, we had to drive hours to find family members that had a generator that we could borrow to bring back and set up for him. And it was a life situation.
So I remember one time when I have a sister who has really bad asthma, and the whole power was out, and we had to stick her in the car, and we drove until we saw homes with lights on, and we
Mhm.
went and we knocked on a home. We had no idea who these people were, and we're just like, please, can we use your electricity just for a few minutes? And they were very kind and very gracious. But that was a life-threatening thing. And so we
Right.
do have to think that through, and we have to be willing and ready to bless the lives of others. One of the things when our power goes, well, our power doesn't go out anymore because now we generate our own and we're off grid. But when there is a power outage in our neighborhood, one of the first things that Jonathan would do is contact the families that were under his stewardship and say, hey, are you guys okay? What do you need? So that we could make sure that they were taken care of. And I think that's hugely important.
Well, one of the things that, in planning and prepping too is um, you have to keep that in mind. I want to be a blessing to others. I don't want to be a hermit and just lock myself in. Who else am I going to be able to minister to? How many other people am I going to be able to help? I had a couple when I got into this more heavily said, yeah, you're crazy. That's not going to happen. We're not going to do that. I believe God's going to take care of us if something happens. And so the interpretation that I take away from that is, yeah, God's going to provide for you, but that means you're probably going to come to my house. That's how you're going to get provision. So I have to prepare for that. And I have to do my preparations in such a way that if there is people that are around that are in need and hungry and need help, to be able to welcome them in and know that I have enough stuff to help take care of them.
Right.
That's a very
And
good point.
another aspect of this is once we are up and busy, then we forget about our problems. And so I think that's a critical piece of this whole service aspect of community is getting out and helping others takes away our fear, takes away our anxiety and our depression or whatever it may be. Because sometimes it would be easy just to sit down and say, this seems impossible and I'm done. But getting up
Right.
and doing something is just such a blessing to not only others, but to yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, because if you're at peace, those around you will be at peace.
Yeah.
Now, Keith, you are an incredibly busy man. It's not like you have a whole bunch of extra time. So tell us how you found balance with all of the things that you are doing and then prepping in addition to that.
I'm just one of those people that has a hard time sitting still. I have a full-time job that I'm on call 24/7, a large staff. I have a wonderful family, 3 kids that are grown. 2 of them are out of the house, 1 of them still in, that are just fantastic kids. I'm extremely proud of everything that they're doing. They're just wonderful. So spending a lot of time with them, we still do a lot of family things together. But I have 3 other businesses on the side that I help take care of, not to mention counseling at the church, discipleship, being in leadership. So there's a lot that goes on. I'm not really sure to say this one thing is the trick on how I do that, other than just the grace of God to go, this needs to be done. I'm willing to do it. I'm available. Just lead me how to do it. And he does. And so being able to be there for my family, be there for my church, to be there for those that are in need, it's something that moves me. So finding the energy is very easy when your heart is really in a place to say, I want to help, I want to serve, I want to make others successful, I want to make others do well, and I want them to be safe. And so the motivation, it just comes. It's there when you have a heart attitude to be able to do that.
And I think that example is tremendously inspiring. And we try and convey a message to our audience of balance. And you don't have to put all of this, this doesn't have to be your complete passion. We want that balance. We need to be, active in our community and in our religious activities and, being a good neighbor and schools. All these things are so much a part. And And so our encouragement is just find a little slice. And that's what you've done, maybe a bigger slice because of the need and the passion that you have. But this whole balance is so important, but it's something that everyone can do. It's something that everyone should do.
Right. And everyone seems to ask, well, where do I get started? This is such a big thing. And I usually just tell them, just pick a spot and start. You know, if that just means buying an extra bag of beans at the grocery store, stick it in the pantry. At least you've started. You don't have to jump in both feet and have everything done in 6 months that, okay, I'm going to be good for 3 years now. Just start doing something.
And that's what I found in my life is because sometimes I have one of my faults is sometimes, and I'm overcoming this, but I don't want to do it perfect or not do it at all. And you have to take a first step. And what I found is as I took that first step, the next step became clear, and then the next step, and then the next step.
Exactly.
But unless you move your feet, then you don't get that. So taking that first step and then the next step, what I like to call small, steady steps, is just so critical.
So I have a question for you, Keith. As a man of faith, what do you see coming? What are you preparing for?
Well, my first and utmost goal is preparing for the Lord's return. I mean, being spiritually ready and seeing that those around me are spiritually ready. That's vital. That's eternity. That's the most important thing above all else. But then after that, we've been promised that there's going to be difficult times. I'm surprised that as I went through this manual, how much the scripture talks about being prepared. I was really shocked when I started looking into it and studying it. There is a lot in the Bible that talks about being ready for hard times and how to deal with things. So having that ability to make sure those around me first are spiritually taken care of, but then second, that the things that I see coming on with society now that is changing so fast, especially with this AI, the more I'm looking into and studying stuff about AI, the more scared it makes me. It's got a lot of good things, but oh my, the possibilities of what it can do can be terrifying.
I think another important point to make is we do encounter people that said, well, God will just take care of everything. But I think when we're talking about faith without works is dead. The scripture is very clear on that in many places. Faith without works is of no value. It doesn't work without our efforts. And so I think you've just done an awesome job of creating not only this manual, but the ability to put together communities and to understand all these workings. So you're tremendously valuable.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Keith. Do you have any final words for our audience before we close?
Just reiterating just the need, like you were saying, put one foot in front of another. Just get started somewhere. Another thing, just branching off with the society that we live in and how rampant crime is, and just our world's a lot more dangerous now than it has been before. And being able to prepare your home, I think the home should be the safest place on earth, should be your home. And being able to fortify that, it's not real difficult. And there are certain things that can be done to make that secure, so that when hard times come, when people who mean harm try to take, that you have an ability in your home to protect yourself and your family, or at least give you time to take action, but also plan and know what that action is going to be.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Keith. We really appreciate that. You are a great example for all of us in the fact that we each need to take responsibility for our community and to stand up and to make a difference. So for the question of the day for our audience today, I would like to ask, what can you do, or what are you doing to make a difference in your community and bless the lives of those around you, so that we can be ready regardless of what happens? Because together we can make it. We will thrive together.
Yes.
And we love and we appreciate you, and we want so much for us to be okay, because there are challenging times that are on the way.
So drop your comments in the discussion below, and thanks for being part of the solution.